Morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel on leveraging connected cameras for wildlife conservation and protection. I'm Corey Lockman. I'm the program director of Wildlife Protection Solutions. Many of you guys up here, you probably see a lot of wildlife protection solution people on this panel. The reason being is that they come from various backgrounds in conservation, and they'll be able to tell us a little bit more about their experiences, not necessarily things about WPS. So we're going to make this a little bit different than some of the other panels. We're not going to wait till the end for questions. We're going to ask the panel questions, and if you guys want to raise your hands during or after the questions complete and the panel's had a chance to talk, please feel free at that point in time to ask the questions. I'm going to give everyone a moment to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves and where they work and what their experiences are. So start off with Sam.
Morning. Morning, everybody. Sam, I work at Careful Rhino Sanctuary. So we are the world's largest rhino orphanage. We take in the orphans from the rhino poaching crisis, rehab, rehabilitate, and release them. So I'm involved in the tech implementation and cameras. Thank you.
Philip.
Morning, everybody. I'm Philip Hattingh from Madikwe Game Reserve, heading up the Madikwe Wildlife Foundation and responsible for the maintenance in the camera traps in Madikwe.
Tom.
Morning, everyone. Tom Coetzee. I'm the project manager for WPS in Africa. I started my conservation career in 1995, working my way all the way up into protected area management. I've been working with WPS since 2015 while in protected area management and joined them about 3.5 years ago. So I can sit on both sides of the fence, had a lot of experience with placing camera traps, how to deploy them, pitfalls, positives and negatives, and assisting new sites in deploying cameras. Thank you.
Estiaan.
Hi guys, Estiaan, I'm working for WPS. Just a bit of background, about 10 years ago, I worked in the Kruger Park. We had a small monitoring unit, and we started off those days with just 2 old Bushnell cameras on one of the public roads to see if we can determine whether there's any suspicious vehicles driving on the road, turning around after a couple of minutes and go into that area and see whether there's tracks at drop-off of poachers. That quickly escalated to one of the section rangers those days asked us if we can borrow him 2 cameras that can send a photo. Now that's the day before all this fancy software. So we programmed the camera. We went out at night, programmed the camera on one of the roads, sent to Gmail, and within the first half an hour, we picked up first group of poachers. Never thought that we'll actually get poachers on the cameras. And then within the first 4 or 5 months, we went from 3 cameras up to 120 cameras. So yeah, and then after 8 years, I joined the WPS team.
And Mike.
Hi, Michael Hicks. I work with a lot of our projects out in Southeast Asia. My background is actually not in conservation, but I studied computer engineering. So I kind of joined this whole outfit from more of the tech side of things. And with that in mind, I also do a fair amount of our systems designs for kind of custom networking solutions to try and get signals for some of this technology into more remote and difficult landscapes, things like that.
Thank you guys, and thank you for your time today. And for all of you who are just entering, again, what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask the panel some questions. At the end of that question, please feel free to raise your hand and ask those questions related to that also. So we're not at the end just gonna open it up. First question. Can you each take a minute and let us know how you currently or historically use connected cameras in your protected areas? And let's start this off with Sam, please.
Right, so I think like many places, we started out with offline cameras, like Estiaan explained now, very human hour intensive and not real time. And then we moved over to WPS Watch, thanks to the awesome work these guys do, to enable real-time situational awareness of what's happening within the protected area. So my angle today is from a Rhino monitoring perspective, how we use the cameras to assist with our Rhino monitoring.
Perfect. Philip, can you carry us over to what Madikwe is working?
So we basically started the same as Estiaan just mentioned on the very old Bushnell cameras, and lots of hours in monitoring the cameras in the beginning, each photo getting sent to Gmail account, human eyes had to be on it 24/7, and picked up our first poacher within placing the camera 2 weeks in Madikwe, and from there connecting into WPS with the AI, saving a lot of time, effort from the guys on the ground. So we basically use it for like a first line of defense, detection of poachers, and also species monitoring, rhino monitoring, hyena monitoring, which we use then for carcass indication. So the cameras have really opened up a wide area of monitoring for us.
Mike, can you tell us a little bit, a lot of conversation happens to come from Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about the approach you have to take in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so it can be a little bit different out there, certainly. I think the expectation for a lot of sites in Africa is that you put the cameras out, if you detect poachers, there's an immediate response. Like you can get people on site to interdict, that activity very, very quickly. That's not often the case, or it's not necessarily typical in Southeast Asia. The landscapes can be very large, very difficult. There's usually limited staffing for any sort of security response or anything like that. So a lot of times what we end up doing is setting cameras to certainly look for people entering these areas illicitly, but it's almost more geared towards informing, where to schedule patrols and where to allocate personnel in the future, as well as sometimes just creating awareness for other authoritative bodies. So going to the police or going to your local government to try and get more funding or more awareness or more active patrolling in the protected area itself. So sometimes it's more about creating influence or action for the area rather than an immediate response to stop an incursion. Yeah.
Estiaan, can you jump in a little bit, since you had worked in Kruger for so long on the monitoring unit? Can you give us a little insight on where you come from in this approach?
Yeah, so Kruger Park was a little bit different because it's such a huge property and you're working with different section ranges. The challenges was sometimes a bit different as well. On real-time response, because of the size of the park and connectivity and the areas where the section rangers live, to get them that the moment there's a photo that came through and to get hold of them. And obviously, during the night, it's not always easy for those guys to get to where the camera is. And there were some of the interesting challenges in the beginning. After a long time, we started to figure out that when poachers walk in, you can't all just rush in at night time, they hear the vehicles. To actually get the section rangers to put stopper groups in certain areas. Simple mistake that we made is when the photo comes in and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you're monitoring from your phone and it's on Gmail, for a lot of people it's going to sound simple now, but you get that photo and you have to tell the section ranger which direction that guy's walking. Is he walking in? Is he walking out? And the one night we said, well, there's poachers walking out. But the camera is facing that way, so they were actually walking in. So in the beginning, it was a lot of difficulties, and you didn't have all the easy technology of today. So, but yeah.
Tom, from a management perspective, when you were the warden of one of the larger parks, the Border Kruger, can you tell us a little bit about how, from a management, you had to operate with your APU and your teams?
Yeah, I think it's quite important. There's a lot of overlapping of what we're going to say, and different reserves or protected areas will have different layers in place. And when starting off, like we did at the time with you guys, we didn't have that photo fatigue, which the guys have been mentioning about hundreds of photos coming in, and you're going to start missing stuff. So we were fortunate to start off with WPS Watch and having AI immediately available to us. One of the layers we did not have in place was a JOC, a Joint Operation Command and Control Center, which is critical, I think, in the hotspot areas at the moment. So I would very often, in scenarios like that, not be the one responding necessarily. Someone has to coordinate. So to add to what Estiaan was saying, so you think of manners on how to make it easier for the teams and for yourself. You can just, by adding a W or N or S, give the direction of the camera's point of view on the deployment name. So everyone will know, camera's looking west, guy's crossing is heading south or north. So it's a small little things that I had to coordinate, then follow up and sit with the guys, having communication with them. So just having that situational awareness, which is critical. You can't just send the guys out there busting around, chasing with vehicles. So a lot of things have changed. We have learned a lot of things over the years. We've got some of the members here sitting in the crowd that it's got phenomenal operations running at the moment. To the point where it's almost militaristic, and that's how effective it can be. But it takes someone to coordinate it from a management perspective, and we learned very quickly that if you don't have that in place, it's almost pointless having that camera there. You're just going to collect historical data, which obviously is also important because that creates your hotspots and gives you the data to know where to place the cameras, which I think we'll get to a little bit later on.
Thanks, guys. Does anyone have any questions currently? Fantastic. I'm sure we'll be answering a lot of these questions that you may have over some of these questions that we're actually going to ask the panel. Starting off with Philip, how do real-time cameras alter or help optimize your operational approach? What is your workflow when an intrusion is detected?
All right, so our cameras feed into an ops room or a JOC room, like Tom said, and then the WPS AI will obviously alert us of intrusion of poachers, in our case, poachers coming in to the reserve. The Madikwe Game Reserve is a little bit different. It's touching on a question a little bit later, that we've got two private entities and Northwest Park Sport working together. So the JOC or the ops room will then alert the Northwest Park Sport reaction teams and the K9s. We will deploy to the threat at hand, and then from there it will get coordinated from the JOC onwards.
Mike, can you tell us a little bit about the operations? I've traveled with you and worked in Southeast Asia, and we all know the limitations and challenges even working within those systems, especially with some of the governmental control. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach and how you guys operate?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the sort of like operational workflow in terms of what a response looks like is based more around. First of all, there's usually a lot of joint operations, and it ends up being more of a data gathering operation to then set up some sort of joint operation between a couple of organizations, whether that's the local police, the NGOs that may have any sort of arrest authority working in the protected area, wherever that is, to get together, and after going through maybe upwards of a month or two's worth of data to establish patterns in when and where people are entering the protected area, to then go out and over the course of several nights, set up an operation to try and, based on what they've been finding, actually set up an ambush or flush some of these people out or catch them in the actual act. A lot of times out there, it certainly depends from country to country and area to area, but a lot of times the standard of evidence that you need to actually make an arrest or take action in any meaningful way is pretty high. To the point where in some places, if you are in a protected area and you're caught, with snares or with hunting equipment, they can ask you politely to leave, but they can't really make an arrest or do anything because you weren't actually caught with an animal, a dead animal. You hadn't done the hunting yet or successfully, so they can't really do much about it. So yeah, the standard of evidence can be really high, and it's usually pretty necessary for them to use this information to actually catch people in the field directly. Yeah.
Thank you. Estiaan, being that you guys were, when you were part of JMU, in your approach to, you couldn't actively work on the threat, you would have to send that over. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works for more of the visual and the pass-through?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things at that stage is to have an accurate GPS on where the camera is, number one. And the information is actually very simple that you send through to the section ranger. It's right to the point. It can't be a long conversation. It's not a lot of time. So at that stage, you send the photo, the guy's walking in or out or north to south, and the GPS location. And from there on, they responded and they took over.
In a follow-up question to that, when you guys use the Meerkat, for example, and you're operating that, is that workflow the same to the park?
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same, yeah.
Sam, tell us a little bit about your same approach, coming from more of that research side too.
So I think I can break it down to two parts. So we've identified the roads the runners like to take, especially to perimeter fences, danger zones, we call them. So strategically positioning the cameras on those access routes, picking them up, alerting the closest rhino monitor that can then deploy to control the situation. If need be, move the rhino away from a danger zone. We also run 24-hour operations, so rhino monitors day shift, rhino monitors night shift, and a crucial handover of the rhinos from day shift to night shift and vice versa. It's proven quite useful detecting the movement of the rhinos at night, seeing in which areas of the protected area they are, and that speeds up the process, handover process to the next shift.
Fantastic, thank you. And this will lead us into this next question, which I think a lot of us deal with from a working within the national park, provincial park, and private sector. Can you tell us a little bit when working within a collective where you have multiple stakeholders, whether that be national park, provincial park, investor groups, etc. Can you give any advice on how you manage the sharing of data from each real-time camera? And Philip, you're probably one of the best examples of this. Follow up with Estiaan on that from his work in Kruger.
Yeah, so like I said, Madikwe Game Reserve works with us, Northwest Park Sport, with Madikwe Wildlife Foundation and Madikwe Futures Company. The last two is private entities doing funding and manning and maintenance of the cameras. You've got to make sure that your SOPs are set up with alliance to the Northwest Park Sport, the governing authority of the reserve. And from there, it goes into a JOC or the ops room. Alert comes in, and then it gets thrown back to Northwest Park Sport. So in our case, the two private entities are responsible for maintaining the cameras, monitoring the cameras, and then from there, given over into a law enforcement stage to Northwest Park Sport, where they then take it further and do the chase of and the follow-ups of the poachers. Yeah.
Estiaan?
Yeah, so basically actually the same. From the private side, we helped the sandparks by just maintaining the cameras. Those guys work long hours, so we monitored the cameras for them. They don't always have the capacity to go and sit right through the night and monitor a camera. That's where we came in, and it was just a helping hand for them. So after if we detect something, we totally give it over to the park and they carry on.
Tom, from an investor standpoint, when you were warden, can you talk a little bit about this same kind of data and when APU or your monthly reviews and how that had to be operational for you and how you would approach that with the investors during your reviews?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a multi-layered answer, Corey. Investors, you're going to get two types of investors. Number one, the guy that will give you the funds and he just wants to help. If you give him feedback, he's not requiring it from you. You're going to get the type of investor, which in the private entities are very often your actual landowners that will fund the cameras, and they want either reports or the capacity to actually look at the dashboard. And that's where we had to approach you at the time before I joined. And we can create that level of access to the data, whereby they can possibly look at the photographs, but they won't know where it is. They don't get alerts, anything like that. So they can simply just log onto the dashboard and look at photographs. And then there's the guy that would like to get the funds in. How do you do that? And I implemented something that was very simple. The protected area that I looked after was a very commercial entity. So there was a lot of commercial activity taking place. Your field guides are your eyes out there. They deal with the guests 8 hours a day, sometimes longer. And with a bit of mentorship and guidance, you can actually open the door with guests very easily for funding. And guests are extremely unaware of what's happening. They might hear about it, but they don't think about it that often. So when they get to a situation, we had a few cases where guests went on game drive. APUs didn't find a carcass, guests found a carcass. It's an horrific experience, but it opens that door. Immediately, how can we help? Funds will come in, and just by talking to the guides, making sure they know what they're talking about, giving them the right answers, created the opportunity for investors to come in. How you manage your data, I suppose it is quite critical, and I think, once again, it comes with experience in just telling people how important it is to keep their data as close to you as possible, because it can have an impact on prosecution later on as well. So the less they know, the better. But to keep them informed is quite important without giving away too much information.
And Sam, you had brought up earlier about how you use this to help you monitor your rhino movements. Can you discuss a little bit about how this becomes beneficial from a data aspect on the research ecology side?
Yeah, so for us, obviously, we work within a single organization, so a lot less complex in sharing the information, but we do need to also segregate who gets access to the system and so on. Managing the data, like you mentioned now, from an ecological monitoring perspective, we do have endangered and vulnerable species on the reserve that we can, through the cameras, and especially at nighttime when those species move around, monitor them and keep track of species diversity.
Fantastic. And Mike, in Southeast Asia, we know how this works from each government's a little bit different, and each activity of how they even approach from a protection standpoint and a research perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about how that data works? Because we know how involved some of the government can be in there.
Yeah, so I think a relatively typical situation is that, the government has ultimate responsibility for the protected area that you're working in. It's usually a national park of some kind or some other protected area. And then they do have staff that are in there doing patrolling and things like that. But a lot of the work is actually performed by a collection of NGOs that are in there that have MOUs with the government that are doing a lot of ecological research in a lot of cases. The bulk of the patrolling that's done in that protected area. And so you do have to be pretty conscious whenever you're going in to start, putting cameras into this area, A, who is ultimately responsible and who has ownership over that data, and B, who can actually make use of it. So you have to really be mindful of going in and addressing all of these stakeholders and trying to kind of like build a collective, make sure everybody knows what you're doing, and figuring out how they can all benefit from it. Luckily, with the advent of more sophisticated artificial intelligence models and things like that, we can do things such as set a series of camera traps out that are both feeding security-related data to the people who are doing the patrolling and can use that, but also for the people doing ecological work or survey, get any relevant data of animal sightings that have been showing up on these cameras as well to them. So they can be quite multi-purpose, but the only way to really take advantage of that is if you're working with everybody that's in the landscape from the jump. Yeah.
You had talked briefly there about AI modeling. Can you tell us a little bit about when AI is being used? I think there's been a lot of conversations around processing on the edge, real-time cameras, and what we're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe the benefit of one and benefit of the other?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is, like everything else, it's kind of context dependent what's going to be better for you. The advantages of doing your processing on the edge is that it tends to be a bit more energy saving. When you're talking about connected camera traps, the largest power cost that you're going to run into is actually transmitting picture from the camera to the endpoint, wherever you're going to try and receive it. The less pictures you send, the less energy you use, even though the running of the AI model on site, on camera, does take some power. You do end up saving energy in the long term. That camera can stay out in the field. It requires a smaller solar panel. It's more easily hidden, all of these things. So that's the advantage of doing the processing on the edge. The advantage of doing processing in the cloud and trying to send more imagery out is that you can be more thorough and flexible with your AI models. You can change them more on the fly. Currently, and this may change, but currently most cameras that are doing processing on the edge, you load the model that you're going to use to run on pictures when you set the camera out. And there's not really a way to remotely change what model the camera's running. So you're kind of stuck with what you have out there. If a better model comes out, you can't as flexibly react to the analysis that you're doing. So they certainly both have their uses. I think they're both very, very valid ways to do it. You just have to make the decision based on your particular project and your particular operating area, what is going to be more important and better, for what you're doing.
Thank you, guys. Anyone have any questions to our current question? All right, we'll move on. Let's get into some technical aspects here. What are some of the practices you have seen or deployed to help guard your camera traps and solar solutions from theft and/or animal damage? Can you also let us know what are key tools to make sure you are prepared when going to deploy cameras in the field? And we're going to start off with Estiaan here.
Yeah, so one thing we picked up very quickly is, it's all going to depend on whether you're going to do the conservation side of things and you're trying to get an idea of a line walking past the camera. But when it comes to the poaching side of things and trying to get the poacher walking in, we picked up that when a camera's on a road or on a rhino track, it is actually better to, it's a mission because you have to carry a ladder all over, but to get the camera a little bit higher. So number one, when a guy walks in, even if he scans, he's not going to walk and check whether the camera is up in the tree as high as you can put it. So number one, they're not going to steal the camera when it's up higher. And number two is animal damage is much less. Obviously, elephants love to take a camera and break it off and actually walk with it. And we found it that they break it off, they walk, and to the next tree and they start feeding and then they pick it up and they keep on going again. So they always play with it. But and then other thing is with animal damage with elephants is make sure that things like marula trees, it's a brilliant tree to hide a camera, but when there's fruit in, elephants obviously going to grab that camera. And then another thing that we picked up is especially if you work on a big reserve, when you go out, to make sure that the camera's been tested beforehand. It sounds stupid, but you get information that you need to go and put a camera 30 kilometers away on a certain point, and there you go with your camera, and you get then the camera's got a fault on it. Test the camera beforehand, make sure you've got extra parts off the camera with you as well. And but yeah, one of the big things we picked up is if you want less animal damage and humans not to see the camera, is to take a ladder, put a bit of effort in it, and put it a little bit higher up in the tree.
Sam, one of these images up here are one of yours. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you're trying to disguise these and keep them secure?
I'd love to say the one on the left is ours. But, so we've got the ones on the right. So it's basically a camo net, like a gear suit for a sniper, so sticking to basic camouflage principles of trying to break the straight edges of the object. Right? So our human eyes automatically detect certain features in nature, straight edges, round circles, regular lines at regular intervals, and so on. We try to break that aspect of the objects themselves. Some of them, like this, we recently got these ones as well. They're very slim profile that you can see, right? So if you angle them right to where you think the person's going to walk, you can hide them very, very well. Tying into what Estiaan said above eye level, it's very, very important to get as to equipment to take into the field, a couple of crucial things that you want to take with you that you don't want to rush back to. You forgot. So some of the equipment, you can see there's a little light shining, right? So that obviously gives it away. Piece of electrical insulating tape hides that very well. Tom actually gave the advice when we deployed the first cameras with a little bit of press stick where cables go into an object. Helps with moisture and insects and stuff.
Can you tell us a little bit, which I found very interesting when you and I were chatting about the use of to keep the insects out? What are you currently using to do that?
Right, yeah, so some of the previous solar panel boxes we had is a box that has some space inside, and mothballs. Mothballs turns out to work very well for a lot of insects. Ants really like to go for those electronics.
Philip, can you add into this and how you operate there?
Yeah, so we kind of on the different spectrum, opposite side of the Estiaan. We would love to have trees. I would love to climb trees. I miss the trees. Madikwe's got no trees whatsoever. So we had to come up with a bit of a different solution to hiding them. The one tree that is there, elephants get attracted to. So we've learned a certain height above ground to put the cameras. Now, the problem with that was twofold. One, black rhinos love to eat these aerials. They just love it. And then the second one was hyenas. Obviously, if you put it too high, the black rhino's going to go after it. If you put it too low, a hyena's going to go after it. So every one of our cameras got metal boxes. They're in metal boxes that's tied to a little stump with a Python cable to guard against theft. We have placed some cameras up, one or two trees over poacher camps. Legally, poachers cut the tree down to get to the camera. So that's why we're using Python cables. The Python cables just secure it there. When you get to the camera, that information on that camera after the fact is still very, very valid because the camera will only send one or two photos, but you've got much more information and intelligence on that camera of where the poachers walked. First of all, how many in the group you might miss. You might get one photo of one poacher, but the group is three. So when we came up with a solution closer to the ground, you've just got to angle it, find your angles to point it up towards the sky, still to get the guys walking past, but not to be set off by every single piece of grass. I can tell you, one piece of grass can irritate you a lot, especially if you find 2,000 photos coming through. And then just on preparation, going out to the field, just the only advice I have is have your toolbox, have everything in your toolbox, and have a list. you don't check that list and you get out, like Estiaan said, 30 kilometers away and you're missing one SD card, yeah, you start swearing at yourself at that point.
All right, Mike, tell us about how lovely it is over in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky. We tend to work in more heavily forested environments. Yeah. A lot of the problem comes in with the fact that because you're working in forested environments, especially if you're trying to do any sort of solar power solutions for these cameras to keep them running long term, you end up having to eventually push those solar panels through the canopy or get them into light, which means running cables. And similarly, you're talking about very, very dense canopy, making signal very difficult, especially if you're relying on a GSM network. And so you tend to have to get the antennas up pretty high as well. So you have a lot of exposed cables, and in the forest, there's a lot of things that would love to eat cables. So some sort of cable protection is usually pretty important. Not only sort of like sheathing for the cable, if at all possible. You can find heavier duty cables that can just withstand a little bit of gnawing without being completely destroyed. And also cable ties to just keep everything a little bit more neat, a little bit more pinned up so you don't have things, just hanging everywhere like vines. And then moisture protection when possible. You can get, desiccant packets. They will have to be switched out every once in a while, but if you're working with any sort of equipment that does have kind of cavity in it, then yeah, just keeping the air in there as dry as possible can help preserve the lifespan of those cameras. You'll see moisture getting behind the lenses and behind the IR covers and things like that. It's not uncommon. So yeah, those are some of the big ones, I think.
Yeah, Tom, we just did a deployment at Buckeye, and as we know, the solar panels are quite bright, white, and metal looking. Can you talk about the way we decided to go about hiding that?
Yeah, I also think of the improvement of technology and solar panels. You can simply cover it with a mosquito board. It actually does not affect the charging too much. You can test your spray painting skills as well. Quite interesting when you come up with it out in the bush. You can use simple cold glue, take grass leaves, do it on it. Like Sam was saying, breaking the shape is quite important, especially for the guys. Also traversable, do their incursions during the day. At night, just for those, you do not see these things at night. I don't care how square or how big it is, you will not see it at night. It's all black flesh. But during the day, we're protected into it. And I think one of the most important things to take with you before you do an employment is common sense, guys. It really is. Put a bit of effort into it, put some thought into it. Don't just rush out there, put the camera out, and you've got to go back there again in 3 days, or 4 days, or 5 days, whatever the case might be. Another reason for that is you're going to leave your scent behind. That's going to attract animals as well. So the fewer times you can go to the camera, the better. You've got to maintain it, you've got to clean it, of course. You've got to go and wipe off the solar panel. You have to open up the camera, take the SD card out, wipe it on your shirt. We're talking about dust. It's a rough environment. Sometimes it's dust, sometimes it's moisture. We've got a camera out in Mauritius. It's amazing what happened to that thing in the space of 12 months. The camera was 100%, but everything that was metal was gone. There was nothing left. The camera was still working fine, so we had to come up with an idea on how to overcome that. So being innovative is quite important. I think the guys that covered most of the point now, protect the cameras. Like you said, the Buckeye does definitely take a bit more effort and resource into placement. So it's important to go out there with an open mind and to make 100% sure where you want to put it up. We'll get to about how to detail, but don't want to go put it out where either animal or human is going to find it. It's going to be a loss to you big time. One other thing that I think I can mention, this was just simply common sense. I did an installation in Namibia the other day, and they particularly wanted the cameras at waterholes. And I had a look around the waterhole, and there was about 40 of them. I'm like, how often did they come? Like, no, they queue up immediately. You're going to have problems. There's no trees around those waterholes. The elephants will destroy everything. And I simply took fresh elephant down. Just rubbed everything around that tree,
so that everything was just go with fresh elephant down. And it's been the other day, over a year ago, and we haven't lost one yet. So again, that works. It's simple. Michelle over there, elephants alive, and how to protect the tree from elephants. And when they started using chili, but obviously you've got to go back quite regularly to put the new chili oil and deodorant on it. But it does work as well. So there's a lot of innovation out there, and not so difficult to use the common sense and protect your hardware. Making sure that everything is in the box is critical. And but I do think that just be simple. This is take time. Do not rush it. Spend the extra 10 minutes thinking about where you're going to put it, and then when you get there, how you're going to put it up to before you leave.
Also want to add in, use the nature around you, right? Like if you're looking up and you have an issue and you're seeing the solar panel up there and you're thinking to yourself, I was in Zim, 3 weeks ago, we did an installation and we didn't have a ghillie suit material, but we did have the leaves from the very tree we were putting it on. We broke some branches off. We tucked it up under the solar because the park department was very, very concerned that the solar panel was going to get stolen. So being innovative on the fly and being able to do that is pretty key to deployment, especially if you don't have some of the assets that are available that we just discussed. Anyone have any questions currently? All right. So Sam, you showed me something the other day, and if you have a GSM or Wi-Fi coverage across the entire park, a limited amount of hardware, can you tell us how you evaluate the placements of your camera? And this was a pretty cool diagram you showed me that I wanted to incorporate because you take a very unique approach to your deployment of your cameras. Can you discuss with us a little bit about that, what that is?
Yeah, so the cameras and solar panels and everything obviously costs money, so you need to be strategic on where you place them, not to waste the placements. This particular case, the green you see, we've got 2 buffaloes that are collared, that thing at regular intervals, 30-minute intervals. So this is data, I think about 7 months worth of data on QGIS, run a line density analysis on it. And what it shows out is the game trails, right? So the red lines you see there is our human roads and the bypass that the animals use to get from point A to point B. So being able to identify those game trails, but also choke points or bottlenecks, right? So where game trails come together, the human roads come together, because we do want that dual purpose on the camera as well. Being able to detect for security purposes, but also for specifically the runner movements. I think another point on placement of the cameras, if you want to detect fast-moving objects like vehicles, there's a delay between the trigger and the actual photo being taken. I can't remember now, but the delay, but there's a delay, right? So if you place a camera at right angles to a road, chances are the object will be out of the frame by the time the picture gets taken. So identify the direction you want to pick the subject at, and place the camera at an angle so you kind of get that longer exposure, longer axis of movement. This kind of analysis also is nice to planning purposes, but you do need to get your feet on the ground and actually walk the game trails and see where you're going to put that camera. There's some reverse engineering on the shot, the camera shot itself. Put yourself there where you think you want to catch the stick, and have a look around and see what line of sight you have to trees, and that will also help to identify good spots with the camera.
Philip, tell us a little bit about, you have kind of three scenarios you work with the 3 types of collective you have, and each one of them have sets of cameras on their own. How do you kind of operate with each other in the same question for your placements, so you're not just kind of wasting resources and piling one on top of the other?
So, I can't overemphasize this. It's great getting a poach on a camera, getting the guys going out. Take the 5-6 hours afterwards, after the incursion, after the chase is done, after the rest is done. Backtrack. A lot of people forget about the entrance points. Backtrack to your entrance points. Then backtrack and follow the tracks to the exit points and connect those two, and that's where you're going to put your camera. So basically what I'm trying to say is gather your information on the ground from the guys on the ground. From our 3 canines, we do debriefs. We talk to each other. The canines give us a debrief and say, this is where they've gone. The field rangers come in and say, this is where they've backtracked. And then we turn that information into intelligence. It's useless for having 100 cameras and they're all at the wrong positions. Even just by 10 meters off is a huge amount of distance in terms of a camera trap. So my biggest advice, and again I can't overemphasize it, take the 5, 6, 7 hours afterwards, take the time, backtrack, see where they came from, identify your weak points, and then tie it in with your game trails as well, and your road networks. You've also got to make a choice. How many cameras you want to do overt and covert. Some's just deterrent, and some you can place in covert positions as well.
Mike, tell us a little bit about the situation on your placements and how you have to evolve based. We all know that there's limited connectivity, and also not everyone has a barefooted tree climber to get to the top of the canopy. So you have a very unique scenario of multiple factors coming against you. So tell us a little bit about how you guys have to evaluate your placements.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is not a problem that I encounter very often, simply because usually the areas that we work in have very, very limited network coverage, even if they're pretty well established parks or anything like that. And so one strategy that we tend to take a look at is actually just figuring out where you can get network in some of these areas. What you'll find is that if you have a pretty remote area and there's only 4 or 5 spots where you can reliably get a GSM network, people will go there. I mean, if you want to know where to get cell signal in any protected area, ask the rangers, because they know exactly where to go to get a WhatsApp message out or check your email or watch YouTube or whatever. So yeah, we work with the ground staff to figure out where those points actually are, and in a lot of scenarios, that's what we use as places to monitor. It might not be strategically, in terms of points of ingress or egress or anything like that, or the most sensitive areas in the park. But if all you really can effectively do is try and get an idea of the volume of people that are in there that aren't supposed to be, then that's what you do. So yeah, a lot of the lesson that we learned from that is just figuring out how to use the cameras effectively, even if you can't, set up a perfect security network. Yeah.
Also want to emphasize, we saw from some people during, previous to the keynote, but there was one earlier, there are some great products coming out. Hopefully that'll be able to help minimize some of these things with maybe a satellite uplink or some of these things where Mike has such issues in that they can resolve that. We all know there'll be costs behind that, but at the same time, I think that's going to benefit everyone, and these new products are going to be pretty amazing for all of us, as long as it can be affordable, right? So we'll move over here, and this is going to bring us into a little bit of a different conversation, which is, with such a large variety of camera trap manufacturers, solar solutions, can you tell us a little bit about how you go about evaluating the hardware needed to protect your area while also facing the cost restraints? And Tom, can you talk a little bit about this? And you have that Wi-Fi, the GSM, probably some satellite coming out that's a little bit better. Can you discuss a few of these options and how you have to go about that from the cost?
Yeah, Corey, I think one of the last things about trail cameras is that it's an affordable solution, and it's also a mobile solution. It can quite quickly changes. I'm not going to promote one over the other. I think we all have our preferences. You've got to find a good way. Some cameras are quite cumbersome to program. Everything has to be done on camera. Some of the cameras will have software tools you can reconfigure the camera. It makes it a lot easier to just do that. So it's horses for courses at the end of the day. With the cost, and that's something we have to look at. speak to, you can speak to other partners that's been using trail cameras for a long time and get advice. The last thing we can afford to do is waste funds.
Philip, you want to add on to that?
Yes, so Tom just touched on it as well. We very quickly become silos in different reserves. You become tunnel vision to your problem. So speak to your neighbors, speak to Tom and them, speak to whoever is using drone cameras or the technology that you're interested in. Share the story, share the lessons learned, and by that you can save a lot of money and actually spend that money on a good resource, an extra resource. So just talk to each other. Like the mothballs, I didn't know about it, and it's going to save us time.
Estiaan, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of Wi-Fi solution and kind of what that infrastructure takes that we've been working on for Buckeye? I think it's relative, it's very expensive, but at the same time, tell us what that benefit is.
Yeah, so obviously in a lot of areas in South Africa and all over Africa, your signal is a problem. It's a massive problem in certain areas, and a lot of the times you get into a spot where you know there was incursions, they keep on going onto this little track or on this road, and you just don't have signal. And you can't just put an SD camera out there because you have to go back every day. So the Wi-Fi solution, the Buckeye system, gave us the opportunity to actually go into those areas, and not only into certain areas, but you can actually, people are creatures of habit, and the one thing we picked up was that they became clearer, the poachers became clearer. They started walking into drainage lines. They knew, especially at night, they're not going to get detected in the drainage lines, so they can go, if they hear something, they run into the drainage lines. And we never were able to put cameras in the drainage lines, because there was no connectivity. And the Buckeye system actually gave us the opportunity to go into the drainage lines. So with the Buckeye system, you can piggyback off the cameras. So from the tower or the booster, you can take a camera out, let's say 2 kilometers, and you take the next camera, and where that camera loses signal, you can then deploy another camera, and that with that you manage to go into the drainages. It's quite an interesting camera network to do. You can, I think, piggyback up to 300 cameras of the system, and it's also a bit of a more robust camera. So yeah, it definitely. The only problem is, I think, financial. It's quite an expensive project if you start it initially. When you set up and the cameras itself is still expensive. It's much more than those cameras. But I think initially it's a bit of expensive, and then later on when you start adding cameras on, it's much better. But yeah, it's got a massive positive just to get into those areas we've never been able to get into.
And Sam, can you, from a cost perspective, you guys have to do so much and it costs so much to care for everything that you're doing and care for the wild. How do you kind of balance where your resources and your funds need to go against the kind of camera monitoring that's out there?
Yeah, so I think definitely to touch on the point previously on being strategic in the consideration of where you put the cameras to optimize what you actually get out of your camera placements. In terms of hardware itself, as you are vision up there, it's mainly the cameras we use, and so that's what I can talk about. It's just one example, one of the earlier cameras we put out on a very remote area. The antenna housing at the top, so that plastic part pointing actually snapped off while we were busy climbing the tree, right? So you got a little wire sticking out. So some damage happening to the camera, but we can't, quite remote, so you can't fix it there. But it's been running as is for the past 2.5 years, reliably sending photos, that whole system camera and panel running very reliably. So, yeah, good
you. I also want to emphasize, we brought up some of these camera solutions and some of the vendors upstairs that have. So you do have the satellite option. Some of these guys that are processing on the edge that don't necessarily send an image can work on the LoRa backbone. And I know LoRa is getting spread out quite heavily throughout Africa right now. So a lot of options available out there that a lot of you guys might find useful. Again, you're going to have to realize what that cost looks like. Can you guys talk about how you manage the data coming in from real-time cameras? I know each individual location, we can talk about WPS, Watch AI, and all these things, but EarthRanger, how are you guys, and Sam, let's start with you. How are you guys collecting the data? What are you putting it into? And how do you even make that data really relative to what you're trying to do?
So I think for us specifically, it's the real-time monitoring aspect, real-time situational awareness. That's where the first and foremost the value comes in. It's also managing the data, managing the photos. The AI is surprisingly very reliable at detecting objects, but not 100%, right? So you do need to have a person going through the photos at regular intervals, making sure that nothing was missed. In terms of the EarthRanger WPS link, we don't use that as often. The photos are sent through to EarthRanger, and in the future, hoping to be able to run some kind of analysis based on tags associated with the photos to optimize once again what cameras are being used for what purpose.
Phil, can you add anything there?
Yeah, so we're obviously using the WPS portal and then for threat detection, but that goes straight into the EarthRanger and as the teams gets dispatched. But what we also do every morning is go through the WPS portal where all the photos go through. There's a wealth of information coming through. So we're not just using it for threat detection, we're using it also for species monitoring. We've got reserves next to us with Rhinos. We're having a look see where our Rhinos cross straight on the fence lines, which points out the soft points in our fence line where we need to strengthen the fence line because of fighting through the fence lines. Hyena detection, spotted hyena detection for carcass indication, and just general species monitoring. So the amount of information coming through, a wealth of information and a huge database, it's there, use it.
Well guys, that's going to wrap up this panel. Does anyone have any questions? We got about 2-3 minutes left. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I have a question particularly around theft of camera traps. We're discussing networks and how they are linked to either LoRa or Wi-Fi. If a camera trap is taken, does that compromise the security of your entire network? And if so, do you have fail-safes to safeguard against that?
Mike?
Typically speaking, no. If any one single device is taken, it won't compromise the security of your network. It's like any other device. First of all, I guess with a camera trap, there's nothing really that you can do usefully by connecting, through that camera trap to the network. The only thing the camera trap can do is what it's pre-programmed to do. It's not like if you were to get a hold of an unlocked cell phone or something like that, you can do more creative things, or a laptop or something like that. And also at least with every device that I've worked with that can be connected to a Wi-Fi network, the password is in the device, but it's encrypted. You can't just, log into the device somehow and get the network password, nor is it, displayed in plain text anywhere in any of the menus or interfaces. So no, I wouldn't say that you're compromising the security of your network by having these devices.
Next question. Anyone else want to add to that?
I just want to mention that we're now able to capture GPS information from some of the cameras, so if someone does take it, we'll be able to follow them and find out where that camera goes.
Thanks, Matt. I was actually going to mention that. Some of these cameras that are coming out that are GSM, even the UOVision and Spartans, and some of these have a GPS module built into it. You can start tracking that if someone does take it as long as it's live. So really good and innovative things that are coming out that will allow that to take place. Any other questions? Did that answer your question? Excellent. Yes, sir.
I
want to ask about the future of limited camera traps. Is there any way or any development that are being done to have more affordable and also more accessible camera traps, especially for like developing countries, conservation organization? Like currently, maybe most of the camera traps are very much expensive, and also most of our areas don't have GSM, and also like connectivity is very expensive architecture. Are there any camera traps which are going to use other technologies, which is not Wi-Fi, which is not GSM, like meshed camera traps, like a meshed network, which only maybe they can communicate on their own, and look maybe we might have connectivity on. Is there any such developments which are happening in the camera trap community?
So there are a handful of models of camera traps that are out there that can do things similar to how the Buckeye system works, where it kind of creates a network between the cameras themselves that is slightly, a slightly friendlier price point than those, but it still is sort of in the realm of what you would expect for, a GSM camera trap. And at the end of the line, you do still need to connect those to a GSM network somewhere. Wildlife Protection Solutions is working on a few things to kind of address that issue, to create more affordable long-range radio links to hopefully get data out of more remote areas. But outside of the sort of developments that we're seeing by some of the folks up in the vendor marketplace with satellite based connections, it's pretty hard. If the question is, in a landscape with no signal, what do you do? That's always going to be a hard problem, and it's probably always going to take a bit of infrastructure or a bit of clever device, design in sort of like satellite connections and things like that to address that problem. So unfortunately, nothing super cheap that you can dump in the middle of nowhere that'll help.
And again, there's some unique products upstairs that can even turn your just typical SD camera into that satellite uplink. Again, there are costs associated with this. We can all look at GSM and say, oh, $5 a month per camera, we can operate that, and that's such a small hit. But as you know, and especially here in South Africa, load shedding knocks out towers. You have constant problems with GSM. You're going to have to evaluate, and you're going to have to get that funding to get that much larger mesh network of cameras. It costs money. I think anything can be solved if you have an unlimited amount of money, but unfortunately, as many of you who work in park systems, there isn't those funds. It's that evaluation that we all need to work harder to get. So, guys, we're running up against the time. Any more questions? And if you do have some individually for the panel, please come up and ask. Always vet. Before you go out and just buy a bunch of stuff, I would always say, do what we discussed earlier. Talk with the people who have doing this a long time. A lot of these people have a lot of cameras out there, and that information that they have working over large park management structures, whether that's Africa Parks, Peace Parks, or anyone, have been doing this a long time. I would advise you to seek them out and have an honest conversation about how they can do this at a large scale.